Hey guys, I wanted to set up a clip that I'm about to share with you guys of a podcast that I was just fortunate enough to be a guest on. Recently, I talked to Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, a podcaster, co-host of the Long Rewind podcast, which is an 80s podcast. Every week they look back at 80s movie and pop culture history, trying to figure out why this thing, that resonates with me because I'm a seeker, right? He's also a professor. He was on my show to talk about his career, his fandom, his VHS roots. That's a wonderful discussion that you can see right here on Serial at Midnight now. But he had me on the Long Rewind podcast to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me, which is the 80s affection for the 1950s. How the movies, the music, the culture of the 1950s was echoed in the 1980s. Think about Back to the Future as the most obvious example of that thing. But we're also talking about the music of the Stray Cats. We're talking about the films of David Lynch, really. There's a real nostalgia during the 1980s for the 1950s. And so we did a whole episode about it that runs about an hour. And you can find this. I'm going to play a clip for you guys, but you can find this at the Long Rewind podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcast. There's also a YouTube channel that I will link in the description of this clip. But go check them out. Subscribe to the channel. I think that there's a lot of... I appreciate the approach. You know what I mean? I appreciate not just saying, well, the 80s were cool because, like, Terminator, right? He was like, I'll be back. And then he came back. No, going deeper than that, really trying to get into the under the skin of why some of this stuff is the way that it is. So here's a clip from the show, and I'm not going to come back and talk after the clip, but you can find this wherever you get your podcast. Thanks to Dustin Morrow, The Long Rewind. So this is all running under the currents. In the 80s, filmmakers grew up in the 1950s, so they want to homage what they grew up with. You know, I have a few movies that I wanted to name here too. They don't take place in the 50s, but The Blob gets remade in the 1950s by Chuck Russell. John Carpenter remakes The Thing from Another World as The Thing. Cronenberg does his version of The Fly. Invaders from Mars is another one. Tobe Hooper. So you have these creators drawing from their experiences, but we're going to do it better now because we have better money, more money for special effects. We can tell more visceral, grittier stories. All of this, I think, plays into the scene.
Yeah. I.e. what our generation is doing right now. Every 80s property. I mean, when you're rebooting stuff like The Fall Guy, then you're reaching the bottom. Not to I mean, I love that show. Not to denigrate that show because I loved that show when I was a kid. But that's a more obscure property in terms of its pop culture resonance today, and they're rebooting it. So it's we're definitely I think we've started to exhaust our capacity to reboot the 80s. Although they always find new ways to do it.
I think they're going to move on. They've moved on to the 90s now. I think that's the next thing.
Well, it's because the millennials are starting to take over the industry, right? So we're going to get nothing but 90s reboots.
So do you think we're running on a 30-year nostalgia cycle, a 25-year nostalgia cycle? It's around there, right?
Yeah. Well, I actually Googled that, and I was interested to see if there was an actual number that historians had marked, and it kind of is. It's of course not exact, but it is basically a 30-year cycle. And so apparently, in the 90s, there was some romanticization of the 60s and 70s. We were getting stuff like Dazed and Confused. Linkletter obviously loves the 70s. So the 90s were looking at the 60s and 70s. The 50s, apparently, there was a lot of nostalgia for the 20s, for the roaring 20s. And in the 40s, this is complete news to me. Apparently in the 40s, there was a wave of nostalgic product around the 1910s. So it does seem to be kind of a 30-year cycle, which for the 80s would actually have been sort of the Zeds and the teens. But it's hung on a little longer than most of these cycles do. I mean, we're still getting 80s stuff. For whatever reason.
Do you think that's because the 80s were such a prolific era for commercial properties. I mean, we saw the deregulation of the airwaves through Reagan, so we're getting things like Transformers and GI Joe, and oh, I could go on forever. But those are essentially commercials
Yeah,
for
I think that's a. I
children.
think that's a great. I think that's true. I think that's a very pragmatic reason for it to happen. It also seems to be, like you said, kind of an ideological coming around of a new or a desire to return to a conservatism